interrupt this incredibly awesome music to bring you some incredibly awesome political talk on Damn Radio.
Hello, good evening, welcome. I am Samuel Trapp. This is International Flavor. You're listening to Damn Radio. I'm coming to you live tonight from the Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Art Studio. And I've got a bunch of things I want to cover tonight, but not in any particular order. A lot of topics, a lot of interesting news coming out. I think I want to start with some direct quotes. I had to go out and find these because there's been various stories about the Angelina Jolie guard, and I've been out looking. If you listen to it from the West, she's out there, doing all kinds of things and protecting children and talking with children who sit under constant shelling every day and all that kind of thing. And then you hear it from the other points of view, and you hear what we do not hear, the part of the story that we do not hear. And so I'm going to share with you a bit of a monologue that someone was giving, and then a bit of a discussion between several people. But I'm going to focus on just two. And I don't have their names right here, but let's talk about it. First, they were talking about some sort of genetic error. They were talking about corruption in Ukraine. And this is on Solovyov, An Evening with Solovyov, which I like to watch. And just to get an alternative view, right? And they have their share of propaganda. We got ours. Or we just don't provide the rest of the story. Where is Paul Harvey when you need him? Providing the rest of the story. We don't get the rest of the story. But he was talking about how everybody's, he said there's some sort of genetic error on the production line of these puppets. And he's talking about people like Zelensky. He said, it's impossible to distinguish one from the other. And he was talking about Yanukovych, Zelensky, all the other Ukrainian people. He says, but they are all crooked. They are really crooked. But all of this is just some sort of tragedy. And at the same time, the level of such is so high, such theft. But notice the Western says, blow by blow, it's going to be difficult for them. But this is Russian propagandists speaking, but it isn't. This is Naboo. So he's saying, of course it's Russia. Why not Russia? Of course Russia. Yes, of course. And we don't even need to say anything. We don't need to say anything, and we will still be blamed. It's just Mindik, the owner of Studio Kvartal, which he co-founded with Zelensky. It was this organization that they created the service of the people, the man of the people, the popular satire on domestic political corruption in Ukraine, which the show led Zelensky to the presidency. And then life repeated art. You can call us Russian propagandists, but the trolls and bots will all be delighted. It is certainly undeniable that Ukraine should not help that any money, or shouldn't have helped that money would be stolen. But this phrase, despite all this talk of democracy, is no different from any other comments. We didn't steal these comments. We don't steal. We don't have that type of corruption. For us, it's not even close. Those who try to engage in such corruption are sitting in jail all over our country. And we were brought to our senses in the 90s. But these people from the West, and it reminded me of the guy who calls in all the time, these Western faggots, he said, come to your senses. You, Ursula von der Leyen, types stole billions. You are even afraid to start a business, and you want to steal Russia's money, they're talking about. And Bloomberg, I'm sorry, I'm going to tell you just like he said it on the TV. He said, and these people from Bloomberg, these bastards in America, you have Biden with his sons in the same Ukraine. They stole all kinds of money, but it's all Russia's fault. You need to be imprisoned, bastards. And of course, listen to the Western media. Angelina Jolie, another greedy Hollywood bitch. She took pity and some money from modest guys in the I don't know the abbreviation PCC. I think it was the Army. And this part of the story I didn't hear before. I've seen it, but I haven't heard it from anybody. And he says Ukrainian officials demanded $100,000 from Angelina Jolie for the release of her bodyguard. And he played the video. And the video was in English, and I haven't been able to find it. And I saw it, but I couldn't see any identifying marks on it, and like where it came from, whether it was a TV station or what. But it didn't appear to be a YouTube video. He must have gotten it from a TV station, but they played it in English, and I heard the English and then heard the translation in Russian. And so it was in the English language, and maybe it came from Europe or something. I don't know. But what he said on the show was Ukrainian officials demanded $100,000 from Angelina Jolie for the release of her bodyguards. And I heard that exact comment from whatever person was speaking in English, and Angelina Jolie stated that they wanted $100,000 from her. So they arrested her bodyguard in the hopes of getting her to pay a bribe to them. And so that was new. And I'd heard it before, but not straight up, and certainly not in English. And so the video was in English, though. I just haven't been able to find it. Maybe somebody better skilled than I at finding those will be able to find it. But this story goes on for several minutes, or this conversation that he was having, or this, because they each get to go on and do their dialogue. And so I translated what he said as near as I could, and it was fun to listen to, and so I thought I'd share it with you. But Ukrainian officials demanded $100,000 from Angelina Jolie for the release of her bodyguard. She was dragged into a real drama in the zone of hostilities during her recent visit to Ukraine. The bodyguard of the actress, who was also her driver, was detained and taken to the police station after he was stopped at a checkpoint. He was accused of not having military documents. Jolie was in shock when the man was taken away and sent to the regional recruitment center. She went to this regional recruitment center to try to negotiate his release. The employee of the Legacy of Wars company who accompanied Jolie said the situation in the recruitment center was sharpened or was pretty. It got worse, basically, after the employees demanded money from the actress. They said they could release him for $100,000. It was shocking. They just called the price as if it were part of the documentation, said one of the members of the organization. And I heard them say, as if this was an everyday, request, asking for $100,000. They don't ask for $100,000 from everybody. I'm sure they did that because it was Angelina Jolie. Later, a statement by the news agency confirmed that this incident took place in Nikolaev. The official emphasized that Jolie did not interfere in any military work, and Ukraine is doing its best to prevent citizens from evading the call to duty because the hostilities are intensifying. we were told that Angelina Jolie felt an extreme need and had to go pee, is what the guy said. And everyone knows, well, the only place in Ukraine where you can calmly satisfy this need for a Hollywood star is the regional recruitment center. Listen, citizens of Ukraine, do you really want to die for this power? Klitschko told you, he's another Ukrainian theft guy, told you that the time to be called had to be shortened. Your what they said, and this is a bad translation, but he said that they needed to reduce the recruitment age. Tell me, do you really have, what do you have, about 1.5 million young men left? About 1.5 million. In 3 years, when everyone dies, will you continue to include fools and young men? I do not understand those for whom you put your life in their hands are just thieves and scum. By the way, much worse than those against whom one of you jumped on Maidan. And Maidan is, the overthrow of the government. Can we match it? Let's show this. Today, Pavel and I wrote in the morning, and Pavel says, I just got back, but I want to show it. Anyway, this is a frightening video, and I watched this video, and this I want to share with you, but this is horrifying. And it was I watched the guy tell his story, and he's basically a Ukrainian prisoner of war, and he's being held, and he's telling these things rather matter-of-factly, and he's not very bright, and he has a bit of a stutter, so it was hard to follow him completely. But what he said was, it's the one of the guys talking first. He said, they made this film, and it's very hard to watch these. I had a whole discussion with my students at the academy, who are all future priests. But at the same time, I showed this frame to them, and we were all in a consensus about these horrible crimes and such a terrible number of crimes. But I want people to understand what we are talking about. And I'm reading the whole part. And so this guy starts talking, and here's where the Ukrainian prisoner of war started to talk. And what he said was, so the commander told us that we had to understand who we are fighting with, so that there would be no peace in this village we were attacking. And this village, it turns out, was in Kursk. So last year, when the Ukrainians crossed into Kursk, what they were doing was systematically going to villages, and there were a lot of stories of it at the time, but of course the West didn't carry it at all. And you would see it and hear it. It was all over Telegram and everywhere else. Well, this guy and a couple others have been charged with criminal affairs for crossing the border into Russia. And Russia said that when they picked these people up, they were not going to charge them under any sort of war. They were going to charge them as criminals. And if we catch the people who are doing these things, we will charge them criminally, and not as this guy needs to be charged criminally, no doubt. This guy needs to go to prison for the rest of his life. But they warned about it and said, if you come into Kursk, which is Russian territory, we will, if we capture you, you surrender. Including Western, what do you call them? Mercenaries. Those mercenaries, we're going to prosecute you criminally. You'll be in jail the rest of your lives. This is not the war. The war is in Ukraine. This is people invading our country. So now the Ukrainians have taken a similar approach on the other side, by the way, so that's not unusual, but they're generally holding to the Geneva Convention for the most part for stuff that is going on in the war. But these are separate crimes. And I don't claim to be an expert on which one it is, but I get the argument both ways, is all I'm saying. So we can figure that out later. But here's this Ukrainian horror. Oh, what a guy. But he was matter of fact about it, and he did it. This is not somebody who didn't do these things. So he said there was going to be no peace left in this village and no one left alive. So we went from village to village. But this village, we went to the very first house, and there was a young girl named Nadia. The commander of our group gave the command to kidnap and rape the girl, which I did. She was then shot in the back, and we went to the next house. There were 2 men and a woman. The man was beaten and killed and shot, and the woman was raped and then killed. Our next battle in that same village was on the 1st, and he's talking about because, well, that'll be made clear here later. We went to the very same village, and there was a basement in the same house, and there were elderly people, and we tied them up and put them in the basement and threw grenades at them. In the second room, there were 2 women and a man. The man was killed at once. The women were raped and then killed, and then we returned to our positions. And they say, the interrogator says, "Where was that?" He said, "It was the Kursk Oblast, the Sudzhansky district." This is where, and the guy paused the tape, and he said, "This is why I think our guys are saints." This interviewer he's talking about. "I would have strangled this man with my own hands. I would have torn him to pieces. He has no right to live on this earth. This is why Vladimir Putin said all the terrorists that came to Kursk Oblast will be killed in the basements, all of them. And then the guy who did the video, or was introducing the video, he says, "I agree, Volodya. Remember 3 years ago when we discussed the possibility of holding a public trial for the Mariupol prisoners, because they were terrible. If you watch those Mariupol videos 3 years ago, we hoped that there would be a public trial. It would be good to be a lawyer for the victims, but in the end, everything ended with just an exchange. You give back your prisoners and we take ours. And the mercenaries, because of the fear that there would be a fund to buy this Australian, Canadian, Austrian, Finnish, Spanish, and Georgian mercenaries, that is why we try not to take them. As for this subject, it's 21 episodes, this guy. That was just the first one. I'm the one who interrogated him, and I can't interrogate investigators. It's very difficult for me to bear what he says and almost impossible to watch, but it turns out that it's necessary. It's necessary because he says a very important thing. He said it's not important, but it's something to remember. He says that the commander gave an order not to leave any civilians alive in the village. And when he says they came back on the 1st, it's almost a month later, on the 1st of September, and they came back to clean up. It's almost like 100 years ago, 80 or 90 years ago. The Nazis were cleaning the whole occupied territories. And one of the Nazi ideologists, Heinrich Himmler, said that the task was, and this is horror, not to turn our victims into our accusers. So that's what they were doing. They were killing people that might later accuse them of atrocities. They just, rape them and then kill them. It was the Kiev authorities who learned these lessons of Nazism, and they consider Hitler a failure. And what he says that the task took was to destroy this guy they were interviewing, to destroy all the civilians. The girl who was first raped and then killed, she was a teenager. They didn't leave anyone alive when they entered our Kursk territory. What we used to say is that we need to create a buffer zone. These 28 settlements that we drove through, Glushkova, Kornievsky, Sujansky districts, there is not a single house left. There is not a single temple. Chram is what the word is. It's actually a church it's the one with the golden cupola on top. He said, "This is a film that we just finished with Volodya's team, and I hope it will be shown." And I watched that video, and maybe I'll give you a couple more minutes, but I want to get back to where we were. But he says, because in parallel with the cleaning of killing all these people, the cleaning up of people that were left alive that might be able to accuse them, another team, also learning from the Nazis, came to the churches and temples and took icons. And if you've ever been in a Russian church, which I have, it is incredible how old they are. And they have icons that are centuries old in there, that were painted in 800 AD, stuff like that have been around in these churches or built ages and ages ago. So they go in and they are cutting them out of the wall and taking them, right? And the most valuable, the oldest, are taken out of the, and they're usually got gold on them, and then they destroy the temples. And so they in these 26 cities, they took out every church. They got rid of them. But first, they went in and took all of the icons, is what they are saying. And this guy, the 26 temples were destroyed. These are his accomplices. And the news comes from Ukraine today. Not that it's a corruption scandal, but that today, Vladika Arseny, the head of the St. Torgovsk Lavra, that's church, a man seriously ill who survived a severe operation. And they say that Chayev Lavra was plundered. The Kiev Purchase Lavra was plundered, and the Lavra is the spot where all the icons are stored, and it's a very beautiful place. And when you go in these Russian churches, they're just unbelievably beautiful. And wow, I went into one, a wooden structure built in like 1300, and what city was that? I can't remember, but it was unbelievable to walk into where people have been going to church since the 1300s, and they have the same icons that are in there, and these same paintings that were done, and people have been praying to them forever, and or in front of them. I mean, they don't pray to them, but I don't know. And they're providing evidence, because it just so happened that I had to go to a fun, and I'm not going to read these whole stories, but these, I listened to the whole show, and I was kind of glued to it, because of what they were talking about. And so I wanted to go into some of that for you, and I do plan to come back to that a little bit, because further in my my text here, I have some of it scripted, but there's plenty more that I want to talk about today, and I wanted to kind of put this. I mean, war sucks, and it really needs to end. It just does. And it's kind of funny, we haven't heard anything said about it since shutdown. And seriously, what have we heard about U.S. funding, U.S. engaging? The only thing I've heard was that, we aren't going to give anything to Ukraine. NATO has to buy it, or Europe has to buy it, and they buy it from us and then give it to Ukraine, because we're going to run this place like a business. Now, I think we shouldn't even sell it to them, but that's me. I suppose if you want to make money off it, that's okay. But it's really not okay, because on the battlefront is faster and faster. This is no longer incremental tiny gains. We're having pretty large gains on the Russian side frequently. And there was a report I listened to today. It said that Syrskyi is really in hot water over this Pokrovsk debacle, and that there, this cauldron, this encirclement of Pokrovsk, and that there's stories that say that they found another 10,000 soldiers. In fact, it was on one of these shows I heard it, that there's another 10,000 soldiers that they picked up and gave them 2 weeks basic training and threw them into the front in Pokrovsk. 2 weeks. Brand new soldiers. 2 weeks. Now, my training was longer than most, okay? But basic training, if I remember, basic training was 12 or 14 weeks, something like that. 3 months, right? 2.5, 3 months. Then I went to Russian school. Now, that was a year. I went to Russian school for a year. But then I went to learn my job, electronic warfare, right? Electronic warfare, collection, jamming, interrogation. Those were my duties as an interpreter. If I went to war, that's what I would be doing. And we had tactical equipment, the strategic part was knowing the Russian, and I ended up I had a strategic assignment, and that was my diplomatic passport holding and doing arms control. Those are strategic issues. Tactical means during warfare, and I was electronic warfare and signals intelligence and listening to using equipment to listen to other people, right, to the other side, or be able to, in all the training that you went through. I never used it in war because, I speak Russian. If I'd have spoken Arabic, I'd have been on the front in Iraq 1 and Iraq 2. But to take people who have never been in the army or been in the military at all and give them 2 weeks to learn how to use a weapon, to learn how to throw a grenade, to learn how to maybe use a Kalashnikov rifle, something, to even wear your equipment properly, anything. And everybody wants to be a drone operator, but these 2 weak people, they aren't learning how to do drones. No friggin' way. They're throwing them out in the front and throwing them a rifle and saying, take Pokrovsk back. And I've seen several reports of this, but I only saw the one video. And if that's true, the end is nigh. The end is here, basically. And you heard me read a little while ago that little clip that said, you want to grab a weapon and, come on down and stand a post. What do you, for your young men? You have 1.5 million young men left. Now, remember, the recruitment age, or the it's not recruitment, it's mobilization. They're just picking people up off the street, beating the snot out of them, throwing them in a van and taking them to a place, giving them 2 weeks of training, and they're they're against it. So 2 weeks of training when they don't want to be trained, and they're leaving. They say a fourth of them are going AWOL and trying to get out, and then they're getting charged with that, or killed for that. I mean, it's brutal what's going on. But 18 to 25-year-olds are not mobilized, and in fact, they've allowed tons of them to leave the country, and they just have to register, and then they can leave the country. And so that's exactly what they're doing, because they know the next step is to mobilize the 18 to 25-year-olds. So the comment is, well, geez, what do you got, 1.5 million of those if you're lucky? And that's true, because they don't have more than 20 million people left in Ukraine. They had 50. Back in 1991, they're less than 20 now, is the numbers that I've seen, and everybody's leaving. Anyway, they don't have anything to go. I'm against this war, and it needs to end. It will end at some point, and Russia is driving right now. They're driving, and but there were two stories that I wanted to talk about, and for different reasons. And the first one is just another part of how ugly this is. Now, this one happened in Donbass. Now, Donbass is now Russian territory, and they didn't say whether it was Donetsk or Lugansk, but another one occurred south of Moscow as well, that there are people there, but not as bad as this one. In this one, in Moscow, southern suburb somewhere in Moscow, there's a 9-year-old boy, and he picked up what he thought was some money because they tied some money to something in the ground in the string, and instead he lost. He's not dead, but he was blown up by an explosive device picking it up, and that's one story I want to get to. On the other one is a lady from Siberia. And Russia Day, which I can't remember the day. I want to say it's like June 12th or something, but I don't remember. But she's a blogger. Her name is Maria Makhmutova, and she's from the town of Shelechov in the Irkutsk region. And she opened her mouth on Russia Day and went on a rant on a video. And now she's serving a criminal sentence for the... I don't know what you would call it, circumstances for what resulted afterward. So same country, same government, two different types of cases. Both of them tell us about, the line between protecting society or just punishing people. Okay. So let's start with the boy first. And according to the Russian reports, he sees what looks like a banknote on the ground. He's 9 years old. Of course, he reaches down to pick it up. And somebody planted an improvised explosive device right under the money, and it detonated. Wasn't a movie stunt, not a YouTube prank. It's a kid in a city street. And he's maimed for life because somebody went after the enemy, by allegedly, by putting a handful of cash and turning it into a booby trap. You don't have to like or dislike Russia. You don't have to support or not support policies of Moscow to look at something like that and say, that's evil. That is terror. That's targeting children. It's designed to paralyze a society. This is not proving who's right or who's wrong. This isn't even war, It's the same mentality as putting bombs in school buses or leaving toys rigged with explosives in the playground. This is not resistance. It's not heroism. This is hatred, right? And so all over Russian TV, and I saw it in several different places, they're using this story for, now it is, I'm not saying the story's propaganda, the story's the story, but they're using it to push the line of thoughts. They say, this is why we are fighting. This is who we are up against. These are not just misguided people. These are monsters. Okay, now that is quite extreme, right? I mean, that's what you're saying about Ukrainians. Now, all Ukrainians aren't monsters. All Ukrainians aren't misguided people. All Ukrainians aren't capable of putting a bomb in the ground, tying some dollars to it, and blowing up a 9-year-old boy. That's just evil, okay? And so, on the one hand, we have newscasters and people, and I read to you a little bit about the Solovyov show because it's an adult program. They swear, they say things. Like I said, that they were calling people bastards, swolich, and they were calling them whores, and they say some bad things on there sometimes, but normally the swolich is about the worst as it gets, but it's usually not too far. And then they'll call them pederasty, which what that is, a pederast. They'll call them stuff like that, but generally it's not too bad. But they can say things as long as they say them about the enemy. Okay, if you accept that framing, that you convince yourself that your opponent delights in blowing up 9-year-olds, then suddenly every airstrike, every missile, every harsh law at home appears justified. It's like us here in America. They blew up the two towers, which to me is probably more and more likely to me an inside job of some sort. You know, I don't accept that it would occur the way that they have it. I need some far more convincing. So somebody out there did that. And to use that to claim to steal from us the rights that they stole under the, I can't even remember what it is anymore, but the terrorism laws, you know, where we give up certain rights and they create these airline things and start to track everybody and track your phone and track this and track that. We give these up, these rights that we have to be not followed, unidentified, because they've used that. Well, other governments do the same thing. Ukraine definitely does it. You know, you don't have any freedom of speech over there, but you can say things in Russia against the other side. And the only reason I bring that up is because suddenly every airstrike, every missile, every harsh law just is justified. We're at war with monsters. We have to be harsh, right? So hold that picture in your mind: a child, a fake banknote, and an explosion. Okay, these are bad. And now let's shift to Maria, the girl I was telling you about earlier. And her name is Maria. I can't remember. It doesn't matter, but a Russian name. And Maria Makhmutova. And Maria Makhmutova is not a general, not a politician, not a billionaire. She's a 30-something blogger living in a factory town in Siberia. I was right. It was in June. June the 12th, Russia Day. The official line is, be proud, be grateful, celebrate your country. She picks up her smartphone and records a furious little video, right? She looks into the camera and says, what kind of holiday is Russia Day supposed to be? What are you proud of? People are living in poverty. Sometimes you're scraping by. You drown your problems in alcohol, and you're supposed to be of good cheer because somebody hands you a flag and a slogan. Then she goes further. She doesn't just attack the holiday. She attacks the war and the people fighting it. She says the only way many people can afford nice cars and apartments is by going off to war to kill other people. Now, I've told you they get paid some pretty good money to go and do that. It's a very well-paid job. And that is why they have people volunteering to go. And she calls getting medals and decorations branding, that they are branding, and it's a mark that you are a killer. This is what she said on the little video she posted. And she says that those medals will bring suffering to your own children later. And then she dropped a line that really got her into trouble. This is the one that got her. Those other ones, those were minor. Okay. And well, they were all relatively minor. I mean, she wouldn't be jailed for this. She would have been in trouble and she would have been sanctioned. But the likelihood of jail was pretty small. But what she said was that if all the soldiers fighting in the special military operation, died tomorrow, then she would sit back and pour herself a glass of wine and celebrate. And that is not, under Russian law, polite dissent. Dissent of what's going on. That isn't a careful academic critique of policy. This is a raw and angry, a deliberately offensive attack on soldiers. And she is spitting on sacred symbols in a wartime society. Patriotism, sacrifice, the army, the dead. So you can understand why a lot of ordinary people in Russia, some whose sons and husbands were over there, hate her for it, and they wanted something to happen to her. So the so-called Z activists That's what they call them, a hardcore pro-war crowd, ripped the video, spread it on their channels, demanded punishment, tagged the prosecutor general's office, the investigative committees. They highlight the line about drinking wine if soldiers die and frame it as public approval of the death of our troops and discrediting the army, which is an insult to the memory of the fallen. So the state, the next day, the cops went to arrest her, okay? And she was hit with an administrative charge. Now, this is not a jailable deal. It's a fine, and it's discrediting the armed forces, and she was fined 45,000 rubles, equivalent of $4,500, something like that. That's a lot of money over there. And in court, she said she'd been wrong and that she realized her mistake and that she wouldn't do it again. So it was forced repentance. You stand there. Yeah, I mean, we do the same thing over here. No, Judge, I'm sorry. I won't do it again. I was a drunk driver and I'll never do it again. And I'm really sorry. And, geez, I don't know, stole my grandmother's purse, or somebody's grandmother's purse. But the story didn't stop there. Okay, the story gets worse. So according to the police, during one of the proceedings, after she'd gone into court, right in the corridor outside, she lost her temper and got mad at one of the officers. And she bit an officer, insulting him and biting him. So assault on a police officer. Here we do that crap. I mean, they charge you with that all the time. You say something about, oh, geez, I've been assaulted. Yeah. But over there, they don't wear 50 pounds of SWAT gear. You know what I mean? You aren't assaulting an officer over here. That any way that they can feel it. Usually it's the other way around. They're beating the snot out of you. But they claim she bit him. And you get charged with resisting arrest over here. You depending on what else you got along with it, maybe you'll get probation. Maybe it's a criminal deal. Maybe it's misconduct. If it's something minor and nobody got seriously hurt, it's just another fine. But in this climate, in the climate in Russia, it turned into a full-blown criminal prosecution. So now, because she bit him and used violence against the police, she was sent to pre-trial detention. And she was sentenced to 2 years and 7 months. That's prison. That's not a fine. That isn't a warning. She went away. She disappeared for close to 3 years. And that just happened here in the last few weeks. So whether you believe everything about the story or not, and I'm not saying I do, because there's stuff that came from various angles. I'm much, much, much more of a middle-of-the-road type, both in the U.S. and in Russia. I don't think you should assault a police officer, okay? That's probably a bad plan, no matter how you slice it. And it is criminal in both countries. It's certainly criminal here. And you won't get away with it, and you can't assault you can't bite a police officer and pretend that nothing happened. I don't know that you should get 2 years and 7 months for it, but okay, I different strokes for different folks. I've told you before that in Russia, people who kill get less time than people who deal drugs. I always thought that was a bit odd, but it's definitely true. So my middle of the road position says, I'm much more giving this to you to food for thought, as it were. Do I think it's disgusting to raise a glass to the hypothetical death of thousands of soldiers, many of whom may have been, thinking twice after they sign the contract. So yes, I do. Do I think her comments are cruel to mothers and families who lost someone? I sure do. Would anybody invite her to speak at a memorial event? Probably not. But I suppose the hard part is, having grown up in America and knowing what I know about freedom of speech, it is not whether we tolerate polite, well-reasoned, and respectful opinions. The test of free speech is whether you can tolerate the ugly ones, the ones we hate, the one that makes our blood boil. Because here the rule is you can say what you want, but if the rule happens to be you can say what you want as long as it doesn't offend the army, the government, a church, an activist, Donald Trump, anybody. But a private party has a private recourse. If you say something untruthful about someone, they can sue you. If they change the story before they put it on the BBC, you can sue them for that. If it misrepresents what you were saying. But if you just think that something is ugly, now are you attacking someone specifically when you say I wish all these people were dead? No, but it's definitely offensive, and I don't know that. I mean, freedom of speech doesn't exist in a lot of places anymore, and there are rules when that you have to, societal rules that you got to learn to live by. But freedom of speech doesn't mean I can tell lies about you. That you can sue me for that, right? But there's I can say it, sure. I have the freedom to say whatever the hell I want. If it's untruthful, somebody can sue me. And financially is the way to get those people. I don't think I should be thrown in jail for something I said. I've said some things here on this program that perhaps might not be all that favorable to some folks versus others. You know what I mean? And I don't want to encourage anyone to do that, any sort of thing. So the Russian state looks at a 9-year-old gets blown up and says, we need harsher law, harsher punishment, less tolerance for those that might undermine our war effort, and we got to do something about these people putting dollar bills on, but they allow people in public commentary spaces like TV, radio, to say horrible things about other people in other countries, and svolichi and stuff like that, all those other words. But you can't let a girl say, if everybody died tomorrow, I'd like to sit down and have a drink of wine. I think that's offensive and I don't like it, but as an American, I have a different point of view. In Russia, you're not supposed to say during wartime anything that is negative. It's not really the right word, and I'm not reading, and I didn't pull up the law in specifics, but you can't publicly demean what is going on. You're not allowed, and same in Ukraine. I mean, they have similar well, it's more harsh in Ukraine, to be frank, but I don't know. But if you lump a blogger's ugly rant in with like terrorism and sabotage, if you treat words as a kind of bomb that has to be, given a prison sentence, I mean, it's not, but she went to prison for biting a policeman. You've caught, because she was only fined, she was fined the $45,000. I'd be pissed off too. Where are you going to come up with that as a blogger in a factory town? But I don't know. if you're defending people from violence at that point, or if you're defending your image from being embarrassed. I don't know. But let's not pretend that we're a whole lot better here in the West. We might not be jailing people for discrediting the army, but we destroy people's lives for saying the wrong thing. People shoot other people because they disagree with them. We don't always send you to a penal colony. We send you to a digital wilderness. You lose your job. Your bank account is drained. You lose money. You lose a platform. Do you know, trying to watch this Vladimir Solovyov show? It gets deleted all the time by YouTube. Says it violates YouTube policy. So when it comes up, I try to download it as quick as possible and watch it. And because it's hard to watch because they always delete it, and because they don't agree with what he's saying. So you can't watch news and comment from other countries in America. Tell me that's freedom of speech, because it's not. And so what are you afraid of? What words are you specifically afraid of? I don't know what's right or what's wrong as far as different systems. I know in our system, you're able to say stuff. I want to talk about a little bit more about this little prick who, because I hate this topic too. War is ugly. War is nasty. I hate everything about it. But, if you're going to talk about the war and how it needs to end, like an adult, you don't get to look away when it's ugly. And I've watched, I told you the one last week about the Ukrainian drones blowing up the guy that's on his knees praying and is clearly a civilian. And they blew up the guy and his dog right before that. It were two guys and a dog walking down the street. He blew up the first one, hit him in the chest with a drone, and a third drone was up there filming it all. So, I don't know. We got one captured Ukrainian soldier on a Russian interrogation video, sitting there and calmly describing how his unit went house to house with orders to not leave anyone alive. Nobody can be left alive. And we went through that. The girl named Nadia, the men beaten and then shot, the women raped and then murdered, elderly people driven in the basement, killed with grenades, and then a repeat visit to clean up any survivors. That alone should be enough to make you sick. But, the Russians take this video on the Solovyov show and they go, see, this is who we are fighting. These are not just soldiers. These are terrorists, and there can be no mercy. Now, Solovyov is a bit on the extreme side. I don't want to call his show entertaining, but I like to get the other perspective. And he's doing it for entertainment. He's doing it because he's being graphic. He's doing it because he's in some ways offensive. And people, he's been doing it for so long in this way. It's kind of like, how did Howard Stern get famous? By being a pig. There was a story, I don't know if it's true or not, but I believe that he was a Washington, D.C. Radio shock jock in Washington, D.C. And I remember when that plane took off from Reagan National and went up and there was ice on its wings and it crashed into the Potomac, and all those people were dying and they were trying to get in and rescue them or something. And I think they all died. I don't remember. And then allegedly the story goes, and I don't know that it's true or not, but this is the way I always heard it, was that he called whatever airline it was the next morning and asked how much it was for a ticket from Washington National to the Potomac Bridge. And that what cost him his job, is what I heard, in Washington, D.C. And I don't know the truth of that or not, but I remember hearing that on more than one occasion when I lived in Washington, D.C. And I never really cared for the guy anyway, because he's just too offensive. But he was more just gross, Solovyov is political bashing of the other side, and that is a gladiator sport in my in my opinion. So I don't mind it that much. And calling somebody a bastard is not. That's not the end of the world. And anyway, once you start everybody, once you can label everybody in Ukraine a terrorist instead of an enemy soldier, anything that you do to them is easily justified. Just like here in the U.S., if you can call everybody that wears a turban a terrorist, well, you can justify taking rights away from Americans to stop terrorism, right? So let's see this. On paper, under the Geneva Convention, captured fighters on the other side, they're prisoners of war. You can interrogate him, you can hold him, but you don't get to put him on trial just for being on the other side of the front line. If he's accused of a specific war crime, that's another matter. So the West, we claim that that's a blur of the line, but raping of civilians is and has been a violation of law in the country you're in for years. So if they take this guy and send him to prison for rape and murder, he deserves it, and I hope they do, frankly. But on our side, there's supposedly a recent analysis that counted 145 people so far. And I saw this somewhere in a Russian publication too, but I don't remember when, and I couldn't find it when I went and had to look for it. But they say that there were 145 people that have been given prison time in Russia in the first half of this year, based on crimes created during war, like rape, like murder of civilians, that kind of thing. And that includes around 60 of these Ukrainian POWs that were tried under criminal law or terrorist acts rather than being treated as prisoners of war. About 49 of those were captured in the western Kursk region. Now, Russia had said, anybody we capture over here in Kursk that is across, that is on our land, we are taking. What they are fighting in Ukraine is disputed territory, where all of the 6 places, if you start with Crimea, all of the 6 places have declared themselves as subject, they've asked to be, they had referenda and asked to be part of Russia. So the people say they're part of Russia, and Russia is fighting to enforce that. So their point of view, if you are coming into places that are clearly Russia, that's a crime, and that makes sense. If you're in Zaporizhia, or you're in the Donbass, which is Donetsk and Lugansk, or if you're in Crimea, or you're in Nikolaeva, well, they haven't gone into Nikolaev yet, but if you're in any one of these Zaporizhia, let's say, those are disputed territories. That's where the war is going on, and it's going on because it's disputed territory. But Kursk is a Russian oblast. It's a region inside of Russia. So if you're going over there and starting a fight with people, it doesn't surprise me that they're being charged criminally, is what I'm saying. But those that are captured in Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, those places, those people should be under a Geneva Convention, and that's that. But if you're in Kursk, there's paperwork. That's the trail, and that's what they said they were doing. Let's give you an example from last year. A Ukrainian citizen named Sergei Karmazin. A Russian military court gave him 25 years in prison. They accused him of railway sabotage. Remember, these are the guys that blew up the railway, that blew up a bridge under a railway inside of Kursk. But they're saying it's because you're on Russian territory. Those other territories are disputed, and there that's war. That's different. But here in Kursk, that's railway sabotage, planning terrorist attacks inside of Russia. So according to independent reporting, he might not have had a good lawyer, but everything else, he did check every box on terrorism, clandestine training, sabotage, conspiracy. Look what just happened in Rostov-on-Don. A Russian court sentenced 15 captured fighters from the Aidar battalion to between 15 and 21 years each in a high-security colony. They're labeled as members of a banned terrorist organization and trying to violently overthrow Russia's constitutional order based on actions back to 2014 to 2022 in the Donbass. Okay, but the Donbass first tried to declare itself free in 2014, I believe. And that's when Ukraine started killing all of them. So that then when Donbass was taken by the Russians, they arrested these people and charged them with crimes back then. I'm not so positive I agree with that, because until the referendums that occurred in 2022, those places were not in the Russian constitution, were not Russian territories. Or they weren't even disputed territories at then because Russia wasn't trying to enforce it. So those were still Ukrainian. I'm not sure I agree with that. But not for me to agree or disagree. Who really cares if I do or don't? But the pattern that you see is they're catching Ukrainian terrorists in Kursk, in Belgorod, Bryansk, Donbass. And so in the courtroom, that translates to criminal charges, sabotage, espionage, terrorism, and sentences that, are pretty harsh. Does that mean every accusation, is false on these guys? No, it doesn't. It's just a question of how they're prosecuting it. There's no question that these Ukrainian special units were operating inside of Russia. And even Kiev admits that they're sabotage experts in Belgorod and Kursk still. So that's what they're doing. If they get caught, they know that they're going to be charged under Russian law. They've been saying that forever. This is not war if it occurs inside of Russia, is what Russia has said. And they've always said it. I'm not saying they're right. I'm just saying that's what they've said. So you shell a Russian city, that's terrorism. You cross the border with a rifle as part of a raid, maybe that's terrorism too. It's certainly a crime under Russian law. So let's go to the confession video and that moron who his boss told her, his commander told him to rape a girl, and so he did. There's an unlimited supply of these sorts of horror stories, that's for sure. So they have plenty of there's plenty of Telegram videos about these, case after case, bombings, assassinations, attacks on bloggers, attacks on Russia. Some of the a lot of the cases are real. And once you accept that the enemy is capable of those crimes, though, burying a bomb under a banknote for a child in Moscow or ordering a platoon to wipe out a village cellar full of old people, then you tend to believe everything that anybody throws at you. We do the same thing here. Our propaganda machine does the same thing. So there was a lady who, a girl, there were several of these that were floating around last year that were shooting Russian POWs in the legs, beating on them, urinating on them. Some of them were serious enough that Kiev said they would investigate, but you don't see much of it. Let's see. There was allegedly a Wikipedia one showed that a Ukrainian POW was also killed by some Russian forces back in 2022. But I couldn't find the ones of these of the women that were so harsh to the men, and the Russian video shows them being Telegram showed some of them being picked up. So there have been in Russia quite a few of these sentences on 20 plus years of some of these people who are blowing some of these things up. So I tell you what, like I said, I don't like this subject because, there are various extremes. One side on the extreme says, everything Ukrainian is pure and noble, and every allegation is, nothing but propaganda. And the other side are criminals and animals. That's what they each say. But both sides are guilty of the same thing. So those are fantasies. I just want you to remember what we talked about earlier. The 9-year-old boy in Moscow getting blown up by a fake banknote bomb. That's crap. And not that horrible things don't occur every day all over the world, but this is nonsense. Every person, every fighter is not a Nadia killer, a Nadia rapist, a basement grenade thrower, a banknote bomber. They're not. But you don't. If you know these people or you come upon them during war, I got news for you. You don't negotiate with them. You don't think of them as soldiers. You don't even think about them as people. You take action, and but we do a lot of the same thing on as far as a discussion or politicization of such events. Okay, I wanted to make sure that got put out. And I have a huge list of churches that were taken, because I researched quite a bit of that, but I don't know that I'm gonna go that far through them. I think I'm gonna skip that part because we covered a lot of the churches, but they're saying that when Ukraine was backing out of these villages, especially in the Kursk region again, 28 villages, 26 churches, killing all of the residents, blowing up their churches, and taking all of their religious symbols and very valuable items from that. I think I've gone through there. I wanted to talk about this tons of money. I heard another discussion on Solovyov. And there's a guy that I like to listen to, and Solovyov never lets him talk. He interrupts him all the time, and he interrupts him worse than he interrupts everybody else. There's something about this guy, and he always makes him go last. And this guy always shows up. He's a lawyer, and he was on the Kiev side. He was a I don't want to say he was an advisor to Zelensky, but he was attached somehow to the Zelensky government when back in 2021, 22, when I was watching quite a bit of this, and the abuse that he took at the hands of Solovyov was, he's pretty brave for just showing up, I thought, but he still shows up. But I don't think he can go back to Ukraine now because he's been, I heard some of the comments that he said that he's not allowed to go back because he's not allowed this freedom of speech stuff. And so they got to talking about the corruption in Ukraine. The story I've been talking about with Mindich, the wallet for Zelensky, escaping to Israel, and they were talking about how everybody has been doing this forever. And they were talking about there's so much money floating around Ukraine, if you're in the right circles, that they're weighing the dollars by how heavy, how much money you can, how did they put it? How much does $1 million weigh? And he put it out specifically. He said, one U.S. bank. It's simple math, all right? So let's talk about this. And it's something that a lot of people pretend is complicated, but it's pretty simple. It's money. Piles of money, tons of it, enough money that you don't even get to talk about it in thousands or millions anymore. You talk about it in tons. And they were talking about it for like a half an hour. And it was a very interesting segment, and I liked watching it, so I kind of paraphrased it here for you. It says, so the guy, the Ukrainian lawyer that I was telling you about, he says, do you know how much, or do you know what $100 million looks like in cash? And the answer is, if you can do the math, is one U.S. banknote weighs 1 gram. So put it in all $100 bills, and $100 million is 1 million banknotes, and 1 million grams is 1,000 kilograms, or 1 metric ton. And that's not a metaphor, that's math, right? So when they talk about the first 100 million that this Mindich grafted in this, this particular Ukrainian corruption case, they always, there's tons of these cases. What they're really saying is, we're not arguing about a few envelopes of cash. We're talking about a literal ton of money. And right now, Ukraine is serving up even more fresh examples right on our dinner platter. Yes, $100 million Energo-Atom scandal in the middle of the war. And so this National Corruption Bureau that they are talking about, the suppliers paid the 10 to 15% that I told you about. And so people are acting shocked, like, how could this happen during a war? Give me a break about all this. Ukraine didn't just suddenly become corrupt in 2022. It was corrupt the entire time. In fact, money was the entire point of his campaign. And you know what is interesting to me? And I think if you're listening to me right now, you really ought to think about this. Donald Trump hasn't said a word about the $100 million scandal with Zelensky. There are rumors, there are whisperings that the FBI is involved with and help this NABU, this anti-corruption deal, in Ukraine to find the money. What if this is the old Trumpsters' way of getting rid of or forcing the Z-Man to do something? Now, I could actually see that being the case. I know that he probably would like to get rid of Zelensky anyway. He's said a couple of times that he's called, what did he call him? The dictator who never leaves, the martial law guy who isn't wanting to get out, that kind of thing. Mr. Trump, or President Trump, Mr. Tactful, he's so very tactful, said at the UN that Ukraine was one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Yeah, and it wasn't exactly controversial, was it? Everybody knows it. And Biden went over there and collected his pile of money, because that's how you do it. You go to Ukraine, you get your pile of money, because That's how the game is played. And it's not small money. It's not like you're picking up 10,000. You're getting 10 million, you know. This is not small. And that's what the Solovyov was saying. Look, it was kind of funny because he goes, look, here in Russia, they catch corruptioneers or whatever they call them. And these corruptioneers, they're taking, when somebody steals something, they don't steal the whole cake. They take a tiny little bite, it's kind of the metaphor he was using. He said, not so in Ukraine. Half the cake is gone or all of it. And, the crumbs actually are what's left for the people who are supposed to get the benefit of the contract or the deal. But everything else is given to corruption. So 90% goes corruption, 10% goes to the place it's supposed to be. And, there's been defense procurement scandals, 2022, 23, and even 24. Inflated food equipment contracts I told y'all about the other day that blew up bad enough to cost Alexei Reznikov his job, the defense minister. There's been tons of smaller scandals at regional military recruitment offices. The one where the commander is sending his subordinates to his wife's shashliki. She was selling her little shish kebabs, little kebab shop that she was selling things, and so his soldiers were going to work for his wife, and they were splitting their money. There's talks about all of the money that they're supposed to deliver to a dead soldier's family, that the commanders were taking parts of it in order to make sure the family got it. They would say, it'll take you a year to get it, but if you give me a tenth of it, then 10% of it, then I'll make sure you get it. I mean, there's been so many of them. It's crazy. We've moved from rotten eggs to energy ministers, but it's the same deal. It's $100 million is not pocket change. It's a ton of money. And, same ballpark as the ton of money that Solovyov's dude was talking about. So Western countries pour money in, military, financial, humanitarian. The money hits the ministry, state countries, contractors, and a percentage gets peeled off into shell companies, consultancies, fake invoices, and discounts that are really bribes. And then when it does burst into the open, politicians throw one or two people under the bus and say, look how serious we are about fighting corruption. That's how it goes. Now, Solovyov was saying, yeah, but you guys on the West, you're the masters of corruption. I mean, you guys make Russia look like pikers. And who is the guy, Zelensky... A Zelensky defender today. He works for Zelensky. I forget his name. I can't find it. It might come up here later in my scrolling. Excuse me. A little tired, a little late for me. He said, corruption in Ukraine. This is an interesting argument. I mean, this could really be the case. Ukraine was so long under the USSR's boot from 1917 until 1991. They were under the boot of the USSR for so long that they don't know any better. They're corrupt because the Soviet Union was corrupt. That's what he said. Does that make any sense at all? None of those people were alive. I mean, geez, the people who were stealing everything weren't even alive then. It's nonsense. But, whatever. Sounds good, I suppose. Everything's blamed on Russia. Russia. Ukrainian corruption is now blamed on Russia. Curious. Well, this ton of money has kind of got me all worked up. Let's talk about the pallets of cash and the lost billions. Remember, if you think this is just Ukrainian pathology, Let's zoom out a tiny bit, right? The U.S. Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction has spent years documenting what happened to Western money during the 20-year Afghanistan adventures. So there was billions of dollars spent on reconstruction assets, buildings, vehicles, projects that were never used, abandoned, or quickly fell apart. One review found that $2.4 billion was wasted out of $7.8 billion examined. That is almost a third of the money. There was massive overhead costs that were skimmed by international organizations that acted as middlemen, that took 6 to 14% for, quote, management. And when Kabul finally collapsed, tens of millions of dollars simply disappeared from government accounts in all the chaos. Tens of millions. We've seen all the pallets. Remember these photos of pallets being rolled off cargo planes in Iraq and Afghanistan? That's not a metaphor. That's physical pallets of cash that were accounted for on paper, but are nowhere to be found in reality. We are the masters, and you can't blame Russia for this. We did this. We taught Ukraine how to do it, not Russia. And Ukraine already was pretty gifted. Let's say that. They knew exactly what they were doing. So when I look at Ukraine, I see $100 million in alleged bribes at Energoatom, multi-billion-dollar fraud at Private Bank, defense procurement scams, Biden-era nonsense, U.S. Agency for International Development, Lindsey Graham running over to Kiev to promise more money, then, Western politicians promising another package of money for Ukraine, another tranche of money, another set of guarantees. I don't hear, well, maybe we've learned from Afghanistan. Maybe we've learned from Iraq. So instead, this is Afghanistan 2.0, Iraq 3.0, with just better PR and a blue and yellow filter. We get white people instead of those other types, those brown-skinned people, and so now we can't find them guilty because they're more like us, right? But all this is the same scam, been going on, being pulled by the same people for forever. Who really ends up with the money? The same old people end up with the money. Here's the right part, the Russian talking heads like Solovyov, they love this, and they're not wrong. They say, you sent Ukraine hundreds of billions of dollars. Part of it gets stolen by the local elite. Part of it ends up back in your own hands, your own leaders. Some of the stolen money ends up in London real estate, Cyprus accounts, Miami condos, Delaware LLCs. Years later, Western regulators wake up and say, boy, what a bunch of corruption. The assets are frozen, the properties are taken, and it all ends right back in Western hands. Let's look at Holomoisky. Remember Holomoisky? He's the guy who opened the Private Bank. He's the guy who helped start Kvartal 95. He's the guy who funded Zelensky as a servant of the people. He did that, okay? And he stole all this money from the Kiev government through Private Bank, allegedly. He washed all the money through properties he owned in the U.S. and in the West. And now the U.S. is seizing those same assets piece by piece. And who's going to get them? the United States. So their money goes into private bank. He takes the money. Then he buys property in the U.S. and then the DOJ sees it back. So who pays the price? U.S. taxpayers and alleged Ukrainian beneficiaries that are supposed to get something out of it, right? And nobody did. Who's supposed to uphold the law? And, nobody. The London court orders billions repaid to private bank, right? So private bank has to get the money back. Nice headline, but the real problem never, ever changes. The system allows the scale of the theft up front. Decades later, there might be some judgments. So when I and when Solovyov and when the Ukrainian lawyer talk about a ton of money, they aren't just playing with numbers. I mean, you need to visualize this. Think about this. 1 ton of cash peeled off of energy contracts while the grids get bombed, several tons worth of siphoned out of a national bank and parked in Western properties, an entire cargo plane of taxpayer money that left Washington to promote democracy in Afghanistan and Ukraine and ends up in somebody's new villa, and we don't get any of it back. I don't think Ukraine needs any support. I think we cut off the corrupt government. But the problem is, if we cut off every corrupt government on earth, then the Pentagon and half of D.C. would be, on the food lines, because we'd have to cut them off. Let's stop lying to ourselves, though. Ukraine's corruption is not a myth. It's baked into every single case we talk about, and it's spilling out just more and more during this war. The West loves this model because it allows our elitists, our Hillary Clintons, to give her daughter, what was it, $85 million through USAID? The West loves this. Pour in money, look away while people skim it off, and then come back later and accuse somebody after it's too late. They've been able to park the money places it's not able to be touched. That's the business cycle. That's how it works. And third, the people that pay for this, ordinary people, Ukrainians, Russians, Americans, Europeans, are the ones paying for the ton of cash, whether it's taxes, inflation, or dead relatives. So when you hear politicians, political commentators, any officials talk about $100 million irregularity, in your head you should translate it to, well, we're talking about a literal ton of money that went somewhere where it shouldn't have. Whose kids are going to pay for that money? We don't know. Where's it going to happen? We don't know. And the fact is, it is going to continue. That's what I say. It will continue. Let's see if I can fit in one more topic. I don't think I can. We are almost out of time. I wanted to talk about Bezrukov tonight, but it looks like I'm going to save him tomorrow. But we've gone from a 9-year-old boy being blown up to soldiers confessing about rape and murder, churches being shelled, tons of money, Angelina Jolie in a flak vest, and I wanted to get to Andrei Bezrukov, and he's a pretty interesting dude. Same movie, different century. It'd be nice to talk about him, but we will get to him tomorrow night, I think. He's got some very interesting perspectives, and so that is exactly what we will do. He had another hour and a half long appearance and some questions afterward. He's a very smart person. He knows about BlackRock. Remember, this is the guy that he and his wife, where is that? If I can find it. He's a deep cover Russian intelligence officer that spent more than 20 years living in Canada and the U.S. And remember, he was on that show. I forget what it's called, the Russians, or I can't. But his wife is Elena Vavilova, and his own kids. Their own kids, their two sons, grew up thinking they were Canadian kids that just both went to American schools in Washington, D.C. And the neighbors saw a standard couple. He had a Harvard degree in a consulting firm. And anyway, we'll talk about them tomorrow, I think. I appreciate you being with me tonight. It's International Flavor. I am Samuel Trapp. I'm here every... you know what? I'm switching. I'm actually going to... Well, we'll talk about that tomorrow night. We're going to switch my time again. I'm going to go not early morning, but morning drive time after the first of the year. I'm very glad you were with me. Hope you join me again tomorrow, 9 o'clock on this same Bat channel. Have a good evening.
Now, back to the rock.